Okay, so we are going live now. We are live on Facebook on Chabad of Westboca.com, I believe. Is that true, Rabbi Kramer?
I'm not sure where you shared it. I can go look.
Did I share it to the right place?
Yep.
I did. Yeah, not so bad. Okay, we can start, Rabbi?
It works for me.
Yes, Rabbi Kramer. We can start?
Yes, we can start. Can you just spotlight Rabbi Crispe? That's you near his name. There's 3 dots.
Yeah.
And then there's spotlight.
Video.
Yep, there you go.
Rabbi Kramer, you turned me into a professional.
Yeah.
Okay, but right now you can't see me, basically.
Well, you do it right when he's about to start.
Oh, so I'm unspotlight. What do I do now? Unspotlight him?
You can unspotlight him if you'd like.
He's such a troublemaker, Rabbi. Now, how do I do that?
Right, the top left corner of his screen. Or you could spotlight yourself by going to your own name. There you go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rabbi Kramer, again. Thank you very much, Rabbi Kramer, for getting us, Rabbi Crispe, to come to do this wonderful program. I want to thank Rabbi Chris. I'm sure that he's very busy and stuck all the way in Vermont, and he take his time and to be with us and give us an inspirational words of Torah, self-understood. When I heard the subject that he was going to speak about, the concept of the flow, so I got excited because I know I've learned Chassidus over the years. Has taught me that when something's wrong in the physical world, is because the spiritual flow is not something's wrong with the spiritual flow. That's what I've been taught my whole life, that something's wrong with the spiritual flow, and therefore we need to fix the spiritual flow so that the physical can become better. So I thought to myself, wow, that's a great subject. We are all going through, we have so many different programs on Chabad the last couple of months, but we never had such a talented, scholarly, very well spoken, can explain something in a very deep thing in a very clear, concise manner. I missed him this Shavuos for 4 hours. Him speaking and talking Chassidus and Kabbalah in such an unbelievable way. So that's why I'm so happy that we have got him here on Zoom for I hope not it's going to be 4 hours. I think he'll give us a little less than 4 hours, Rabbi. But he's going to give us an unbelievable speak about flow, the spiritual flow in the world. And I'm sure that it's going to truly be an amazing lecture to hear. And I hope that you all listen in very carefully and are inspired. And if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat, and we'll ask at the end of his speech. We'll show him those questions. We'll ask him those questions. And I just want to say to those that came on tonight to the JLI class that we have tonight of Outlook of the Rebbe, we're going to do it tomorrow night at 8 p.m. The last class of Inlook tomorrow at 8 p.m. Also, we have the class on Thursday morning, the JLI class of Positively Biased. It continues this Thursday at 10 a.m. So, and if you need a book still on the Positively Biased, you need a book. We have the book, Rabbi Chris, we have a book available for you also on Positively Biased. If you don't have it yet in your collection, I will send you personally a book. So I want to, if anybody needs a book yet, just tell us. We have a couple of books left over. We can give you this unbelievable book, Positively Biased. My friends, with that, I am excited. I'm going to become quiet, and I'm going to hand it over to somebody who I admire for his knowledge and for the menschlichkeit, for he's an unbelievable mensch. Rabbi Crispe, all the way from Vermont. And I hope that you'll give him your full attention. Please mute yourself if you're unmuted, because I don't want you to, he should be bothered. And please I give it over to Rabbi Crispe. Please, Rabbi Usher, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Bucket. It's always a pleasure to connect, even virtually, down to Boca. I certainly missed not coming this Shavuos. This is a topic that I'm extremely excited about because it's something that has tremendous practical application. In fact, this is a topic that I regularly do corporate seminars on and try to introduce into the business world. And it has to do with what we call the science of peak performance, that we live in an age where we've started to discuss something called the quantified self, that we're starting to be able to like peek under the hood and look at the engine in our minds and understanding how we're able to be more creative, more capable of learning, more able to remember things, more able to think deeply into the world, how to connect on a more profound level, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. All of these things come together. And a lot of that has to do with the insights of neuroscience and cognitive psychology that have come together to bring this to the fore, really in just the last couple of decades. And actually, interestingly, talking about positivity bias, as you were mentioning earlier, the very science of flow, which has to do with peak performance, originated as part of positive psychology movement. Especially many of the psychologists that were looking at how we can have learned optimism or a positivity bias were simultaneously looking at what happens to someone when they're in a flow state. Now, when we say this word flow, I mean something very precise about this. And if we do brain scans, we can actually see what that looks like in the brain. Your brain will actually change how it's performing when you're in what's called a state of flow. So there's actually a technical term for this, but if I would have advertised that we were going to have a class on transient hypofrontality, I think there would have been a smaller audience perhaps. So flow has become the sort of fun catch-all term that's used in psychology for what's more technically referred to as transient hypofrontality. And what on earth does that mean? So let's go back to some famous myths. One famous myth is that we only use like 10% of our brain. And if only we could use more of our brain, wouldn't it be amazing? Thomas Jefferson said that if we could do all things we were capable of, we'd literally astonish ourselves. And so that's what we think about if we could tap into the other 90% of our brain that we're not using. It turns out totally not true. We do use all of our brain. And there's a bit of a paradox here because actually using more of our brain would give us inferior performance, actually worse performance than if we actually can shut down parts of our brain. It seems totally counterintuitive, but transient hypofrontality has got two words in it. So transient means temporary. It's very temporary. And then hypo is like lessen. Hyper is more, beyond, and then sort of hypo is beneath or less. And frontality refers to the prefrontal cortex of the brain, these sort of regions of the brain that govern our ordinary lives, where we're making decisions, we're paying attention, we're prioritizing, we have a strong sense of self. It's sometimes associated with what we call executive function, which enables us to sort of like manage what's going on using some kind of internal governance by how we think, feel, how we act. Again, that's our sort of average everyday state. The problem is like those parts of the brain that monitor your ordinary sense of self and keep you in control, as it were, where you're like kind of stuck in your own head. They take a lot of mental resources. So if you can shut that down, that's hypofrontality, that's lessening this frontal region of the brain, the activity that's going on there, you're actually going to use less of your brain and it will then redeploy, your brain's resources are redeployed to other areas and those become amplified. So as a result of that amplified state, you enter what's called flow. And it allows you to do utterly extraordinary things. And you've probably had a little taste of flow at some point. It's called by many different names, depending upon what your occupation is. So if you're looking at, let's say, athletes, winning teams in the NBA and NFL and any of these sports types of teams that are winning world championships, Super Bowls, etc., they're doing it in a flow state. Like that is considered like being in the zone when you talk about athletics. If you're a runner, it's like a runner's high. If you're a musician, sometimes jazz musicians will call this like being in the pocket, right? Where everything is like really flowing. There's a groove happening with the ensemble. And even individuals will get in a state where you'll get so immersed in what you're doing that you forget all about yourself. And your whole perception of time changes. And as a result of that, it's almost like a state where you feel a kind of effortlessness, and you start seeing all kinds of patterns, and information gets downloaded in your brain at a heightened rate of speed. So whether it's being in the zone, the runner's high, the helper's high, sometimes if you're doing a good thing for someone else, you get a helper's high, being in the zone, flow, transient hyperfrontality. All of these are different terms that we use to describe that. And it can be in any peak performance situation. So it can be while reading or studying, could be while giving a talk, while you're presenting a lecture, it could be while you're doing stand-up comedy or improv work. It can be during a mystical experience. It can be during a meditative experience. It can definitely be tapped into in like full immersive media experiences, like with film, or even more so with virtual reality. All these things can trigger kind of flow states. And sometimes you have it full blown, and sometimes it's like what we call like a micro flow state, like just very temporarily. Usually it happens for longer periods of time when you can trip into it. And the question is, how do we get there, and why would we want to do that? So in general, in measuring tens of thousands of case studies, psychologists and neuroscientists have discovered that we get at least 5x performance out of being in a flow state. That means you're doing 500% better than you normally would. So imagine you spent all of Monday at work in a state of flow. You could take Tuesday through Friday off because you'd get more done just in that one day. If you could spend Monday and Tuesday in flow together, then you'd be 1,000% more for your week, and you'd be outperforming not only your own personal best, but other people and other teams doing that kind of thing. So it's very advantageous. And in fact, there's even other amplifiers on top of this amplifier that can be achieved. And amazingly, all of this is found very beautifully in the Torah. It's just a matter of learning like 2 different languages and then matching them up and showing them where they come together. But I want to try to demonstrate with a couple of short video clips, like what exactly flow is. Sometimes it's easier to like show it to you than to just tell you what it is. So I'm going to do a little screen share here. And then I'm going to pull up, I don't know if anyone has seen or heard of this film that won all kinds of awards called Free Solo. If you can't hear it, it's okay.
Does it feel different to be up there without a rope? It's obviously like much higher consequence.
This is Alex Honnold, who climbed El Capitan in Yosemite National Park without a rope.
What he's doing are freaked out. I've thought about El Cap like for years, and every year I'm like, that's really scary. I'll never be content unless I at least put in the effort. El Cap is the most impressive wall on Earth. It's 3,200 feet of sheer granite. It's the center of the rock climbing universe. Obviously, I get interview questions about it all the time. Oh, would you like to do that? You're like, yes, for sure.
So you're a girlfriend now, I heard.
It was awesome. It pretty much makes life better in every way.
It's really hard for me to grasp why he wants this. But if he doesn't do this stuff, he'd regret it.
Everybody who has made free soloing a big part of their life is dead now.
I haven't been injured in like 7 years. I suddenly start getting injured all the time.
What if something happens?
What if I don't see him again?
I could just walk away, but it's like, I don't want to.
I've always been conflicted about shooting a film about free soloing just because it's so dangerous. It's hard to not imagine your friend falling through the frame to his death.
I think when he's free soloing, that's when he feels the most alive, most everything. How can you even think about taking it away from somebody?
No mistakes tomorrow.
Starting to get concise.
If you're pushing the edge, eventually you find the edge.
I can't believe you guys actually know.
Hey Jimmy, you copy. Just started climbing.
So don't watch that film if you're afraid of heights. I'm actually told that Rabbi Bookett was very interested in ascending El Capitan without a rope, but that he's decided to take a pass, thankfully. But the question is, how are human beings doing these incredible things? How are they ascending a 3,000-foot vertical cliff without a rope, right? And it seems like more and more we're doing all of these extraordinary feats that what was previously deemed impossible is now somehow coming possible. And so in general, neuroscientists and psychologists have been interested, like, what on earth is going on that enables people to do these things? Of course, we want to understand where this comes from in the Torah, but let me show you just one more example of it very quickly. Here we have the first time after skateboarders had attempted to do what's called a 1080, which is 3 complete rotations in the air. The best professionals in the world couldn't do it. And then back in 2012, this 12-year-old kid became the very first one to do it. And he also did it first time in competition. 12 years old. So never been done before. Okay, so that's another great example. There's countless of them, especially in the action adventure sport world, where people are pushing all kinds of limits, whether it means doing things at younger and younger ages that weren't possible before, or doing them just breaking limits in general that human beings didn't think were possible. So the classic example of this was the 4-minute mile that was broken by Roger Bannister. No one thought that a human being could run a mile in under 4 minutes. And once he did it, many other people were able to do it within 6 months of him. And actually, once this 12-year-old did the first 1083 complete rotations in the air on a skateboard ramp, there were a number of other people who've been able to do it. And actually, another very young skateboarder did an even larger number of rotations subsequently. So it keeps being pushed in the action adventure realm. And the question is why? What on earth's going on that achieves this? And it's not just skateboarding, and it's not just free climbing without a rope. There's many other instances of these kinds of things. YouTube is filled with these kind of extreme sport, risks-taking types of events. I'm personally interested in skyacking, which is where you jump out of a helicopter or an airplane with a kayak attached to you and a parachute, and you land in some crazy river that's very remote in the world, and you go over like a 150-foot waterfall and don't die. It seems like an interesting thing to do. I think it would be attractive to most rabbis. So this is really across the board. You may have heard about some of these things and maybe wondering, how is it possible? How do people seem to be doing more and more of it? And why are we ordinary people sort of engaged in this way? So the question is sort of, are we even awake half the time? Do we spend much of our lives sort of like in a semi-state of slumber? When do we feel most alive, right? So action adventure junkies are usually looking to feel very alive, like living right on the edge. They're nonstop risk takers. And it turns out that that's one of the key conditions for triggering a flow state, that something happens in the brain that suddenly allows us to do almost superhuman things when we reach this flow state. And it's not just in the action, adventure, and sport world. So for instance, the Navy SEALs are trained in this way. The US government has spent millions of dollars training our most elite soldiers using flow states to be able to work both as individuals and as teams. And it's not just through athletics and tests of fitness or like how to be a good shot or a sniper. It's also having to do with skill acquisition in other realms, like let's say learning a foreign language. It's been found that you could take 6 months worth of language acquisition and compress it into as little as 2 weeks if you put someone to a state of flow. So quite frankly, if you want to be very competitive in the business world, and if you want to feel very alive, you almost can't afford to not be in a flow state. It's really, really critical that this be taught to more and more people. And of course, it's very much at the core of what the Torah is all about. And it's not just mental and emotional and physical, it's also certainly spiritual. There are spiritual flow states that we want to relate to, but it's easiest to sort of start at looking at it in terms of these extreme feats and accomplishments they're being done in the action adventure world, because it just makes it visual, trying to understand what people are going through and what they are doing and how do we decode it. So it turns out that to date, researchers have done a pretty good job decoding exactly what this is. So one of the sort of founders of it was Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's the chair of psychology at the University of Chicago. And he noted all kinds of things that were happening during flow states, when you have this sort of like heightened mental ability by using less of your brain. Less is more, right? So it's a little bit counterintuitive that less is more. But what do we find that happens during this state? So one of the things has to do with brain waves. We look at different brain waves. So for instance, when you are in your kind of wakeful and alert state, that's called beta waves in the brain. And if you are sort of daydreaming, I used to do a lot of daydreaming in school, but if you're daydreaming, sort of staring out the window, those are alpha waves. And if you are in a state of REM sleep, we would call that theta waves. Theta waves is REM sleep. And non-REM sleep, where you're not dreaming, that would be called delta waves. So the question is, what is the signature of flow from a brain wave? There's actually something going on in your brain waves that's happening. So flow is actually where you stop being so alert and awake, ironically, like really fighting to concentrate. And you're actually perched right on the threshold between what we call the alpha wave and the theta wave. So again, the alpha wave is like daydreaming, and a theta wave is like full-blown REM sleep with dreams. And what happens there is that your brain starts to like detach from its ordinary like kind of reasoning skills, and it allows it to make lots of associations and to start seeing patterns that normally it wouldn't be able to see. So like, for instance, one example given by Stephen Kotler, who's a sort of mind coach having to do with flow states, is he talks about how you could think about green and suddenly green turns into a green sweater, which then becomes a green unicorn, which then becomes a green forest. Like your mind is able to travel through those associations very clearly. You start to see these patterns that you don't pick up on. So because you're in this more like kind of relaxed mode of either daydreaming or dreaming, right in between, you're perched right where you can have what's called a gamma wave spike. And a gamma wave spike is like registered experientially as an aha moment, eureka, like some blast of insight that you experience. And we have a slightly different term for that we use in Torah literature, especially in Chassidut. We call that chokhmah. Chokhmah is usually translated as wisdom, but the actual like phenomenology associated with it is a barak hamavrik al seichel, that there's like this lightning flash that hits the mind, and it has to do with having a kind of openness of the mind. Because before, if I'm just like alert and vigilant with what I already know, I'm like kind of confined to within like being stuck in my head, like as people sometimes say. So being liberated from being stuck in your head and having this this blast of insight, this aha state that we call chokhmah. And in fact, we see very interestingly, each one of the Hebrew vowels is associated with a different one of the powers of soul. So interestingly, the vowel that's associated with chokhmah, which we're going to call our flow experience now, is called patach. Patach is like to open. So it's like there's some kind of opening that happens. But opening up my patterns of thought, opening up for new realizations, new experiences, not only it necessitates that I have some kind of curiosity, but that I suddenly like am not so self-conscious and so self-aware. And that openness is going to definitely be that aha moment, which is our gamma wave spike that we experience. Now, there's something else going on with flow too, from a neurochemistry standpoint. We talk about the endogenous chemicals that are in the brain. Like we have an entire pharmacy that's in here, a very powerful pharmacy. And there are five of the most potent neurotransmitter chemicals that we talk about are norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, anandamide, and serotonin. Right, so those are the five. If you don't remember all the five, it's okay. But those are the five. They're very, very powerful. There are, for instance, certain endorphins that we naturally produce in our brain that are maybe 100 times more potent as pain blockers than medical morphine. So this is a really potent cocktail. And it's interesting, in all the things you might do in your life, the only time you get all five of these things at once is when you're in a state of flow. So it also happens to be the most pleasurable state that a person can experience. Norepinephrine and dopamine help you with focus. Endorphins, as I mentioned, is sort of pain blocker, and anandamide is also a pain blocker, but relates to like lateral thinking. That's sort of the associations. Green sweater becomes green forest, becomes, something else which is green, right? All the three associations that we have, that's called lateral thinking. And then the last one, serotonin, is like a calming and feel-good drug that also makes us feel pro-social, to be very social as a result of serotonin. So you get a cocktail of all four of those simultaneously when you're in flow. It's the only state that hits that. So there's some tremendous idea of pleasure being manifest. And so there's this is what's called the manifestation of Atika, or Atik Yomin in Kabbalah, which is the source. It literally means ancient of days, but it's the origin of tainug in the soul, of pleasure. And its first contact point where it wants to manifest is in an experience of chokhmah. That, like the panimiyut, the interiority or the inner experience of chokhmah, which we've said is sort of wisdom or insight, or here we'll translate as a flow state, an experience of flow. Its inner experience is one of extreme pleasure, manifesting extreme pleasure. So the question is, if these are sort of like cataloging from a very scientific standpoint, what we experience in flow, what's really going on, like in terms of our own everyday self-reporting about the experience, what's happening. So there's basically four things that we want to relate here, and they're known by the acronym SETR, and they're all associated with the flow state. So the first thing that we associate with being in a state of flow is called selflessness. Selflessness, because what happens is, in shutting down the prefrontal regions here in the brain, you're actually turning off your sense of self. In fact, some of these regions of the brain that get shut down temporarily in flow are what differentiates between inside myself versus the world around me, self versus other, self versus environment, inside versus outside. Right. So if that's sort of like shut down temporarily, I kind of merge with my environment. I feel at one with my environment. So flow is very much like a unitary consciousness that we experience, to feel at one with the world, much like people in a mystical state or a meditative state experience at the same time. So what we associate in a Jewish context then with chokhmah, our Hebrew term for flow that we have, these radical insights that we give that are in this flow state, it has a whole bunch of attendant terms that nuance what it's all about. So one of them is that if it, like the inner experience of chokhmah, or what triggers chokhmah, this heightened sense of flow, is what's called bitul. Bitul is usually translated as like self-nullification, or here better, selflessness. It's sometimes what we refer to as like the death of the self, the dissolving of self. Like whatever was a concrete, rigid sense of inside versus outside, that is going to be shed temporarily in a flow state. So what triggers chokhmah is bitul, and bitul is selflessness. The first characteristic that we have is the death of the self, right? The death of the ego, the transcendence of the ego that happens temporarily. And if you are ever, like, let's say in a sporting competition, and you become too self-conscious while trying to do some kind of acrobatic move, it'll actually cause you to break your concentration. So my youngest daughter is on the snowboard team here in Vermont, and actually they were state champions last year, and they would have been state champions this year again, but she was performing on the like one of the obstacle courses that they set up, like sort of freestyle and snowboarding competition, and she was like mid-air doing some kind of trick, and someone screamed out from the audience her name. And when she heard her name, it like called her back into herself, for self-awareness, and it caused her to fall. Because you can't break concentration. I can't be self-aware. Similarly, if you're like performing, you're playing piano, singing, whatever, in front of an audience, and you become too self-conscious, it actually will pull you out of that flow state. Likewise, in like a group brainstorming session, you have to have a kind of positivity bias. You have to be very much in the affirmative, like we say in those states. You want to do yes and yes and yes, like keep building upon what everyone's saying, because the sort of criticality makes people self-conscious and then pulls them out of flow. So that's a sort of prerequisite to experiencing this heightened peak performance, is losing yourself in it, losing the ego in it temporarily. And the association that we have with that then is also corresponding to a specific spiritual world. Like there's a spiritual frame of reference or world that relates to chokhmah, our term for insight or flow. And that world is called the world of emanation, Olam ha'atzilut, and it's characterized as Olam ha'akdut in Kabbalah and Chassidut, which means a world of unity, right? So it's a unitary consciousness and at oneness. I feel at one with everything, with God, with other people, with the environment, totally at one. Like I don't know where I leave off and my environment begins. So if I'm, let's say, playing tennis, professional tennis players will say the tennis racket in their grip feels like just an extension of their arm. They don't even recognize that object as something that's non-self, that's other. They feel like it's just part of me. And the same thing with the guitar or the golf clubs or whatever it is that you're doing, or if you're scaling El Capitan in Yosemite, it feels like it's just a part of you. You become totally merged with it in that state of unitary consciousness, which means it comes at the price of shedding the ego temporarily. So we say that the Torah is related to this chokhmah state. The whole Torah is characterized by flow in a certain sense, because we have this expression, doraita machokhmah nafka. The whole Torah is something that derives from chokhmah, which is this flow state of selflessness and insight. And this now helps us to understand something very deep that we read in the Talmud that could be troubling if you read it on a literal level. So Reish Lakish is the Talmudic sage who talks about Ein divrei Torah mitkaimin ela b'mi shememit et atzmo alehem. That the words of Torah are not like really acquired, they're not sustained. You don't have true skill acquisition in this case, or creative attachment, unless you kill yourself over it. So who wants to send their kids to Jewish school now, right? If you got to go to a Torah class and it's like we're all going to commit seppuku with samurai swords, we're like killing ourselves over the Torah. It doesn't sound terribly good, right? So what on earth is going on? Clearly, you're not allowed to literally kill yourself. So what's this killing of what's this expression referring to? So this is in a certain sense la petite mort. In some sense, it's the small death. It's the death of the self, or the death of the ego, the transcendence of the ego, what we call bittul. That's how we acquire Torah. And from having this solid sense of self, which is rigid, which is what's happening when you have the prefrontal regions of your brain that are active in your ordinary experience, that's like gives me this definite identity. But that becomes liquefied in a certain way, and that turns my sense of being a something, which is called a yesh in Hebrew, into a relative nothing called ayin in Hebrew. And ayin is better translated as not nothing, but no thingness, like no specific thing. It's an amorphous state. It's anamorphic. It's shape shifting. So if there's one image that we have of it, it's actually like water. This is actually why flow is such a good term for this. It says, Ein mayim ela Torah. There's no concept of water other than that of Torah. Literally what it means is like the water always is used as like the symbol for Torah, because water represents not Ein, but ayin, not nothing, the negation, but which is Ein means like not, there is not, it's like a negation, but the same letters of Ein can permutate, or rather not permutate, can be revocalized rather to spell ayin, which means nothingness, no specific thing. So water is mutable. It'll fit in whatever container you put it in. It's shape-shifting. So Torah is likened to water. It's meaning, again, it just amplifies this notion that it's a flow state. And seeing water as symbolic of like this getting beyond yourself, what's called ecstasis in the literature that we talk about in psychology, which is like literally to go out of yourself, like having almost an out-of-body experience. I was out of my mind. I was experiencing something beyond myself, like that bittul or selflessness that we're talking about. That's the water, and it's almost like my personality now is fluid, totally fluid and shape-shifting, and it's not rigid in any kind of way. It's like no thing, no specific thing, and therefore allows me to merge with whatever my surroundings are, like become one with the rock face or the skateboard or whatever you want it to be. That's part of the image that we conjure here. The next thing that we find that's associated with this selflessness is that our ordinary mind has a critic that comes with it. Our ordinary thinking is rational, and our rational thought is what we refer to as binah in Hebrew. Binah literally translates as understanding, but it comes from the etymology, which is bain, betweenness. Like rational is a ratio, like in between A and B. What is the proportionality between A and B? How do they connect, right? So we have like fixed measures that we compare and contrast things in the world. And we use that to create models for our inner cognitive categories and representations of not only ourselves, but the world around us, of other people, right? So Binah really is what we call representational thinking. It's mental maps that we have. And another interesting etymology of that term, binah, understanding, is it relates to boneh, to build. Building is like a construction process. So I'm literally constructing a representation, a mental model or map of reality in my own head. The problem is I can replace the real world with just this mental map that I have, which is much more restrictive and limited in some way. So we have to somehow get beyond that. And the interesting thing is when we have mental maps, we're constantly making comparisons, like what's better, what's rational, what's not rational. We do all these things. And it also has how we create our own internal self-definition. But there's an interesting statement from one of the classic works of Kabbalah known as the Zohar. It says in Binah, in understanding, dinin mitarin, that judgments are aroused. So I'm constantly judging everything, trying to discern and distinguish it. based on rationality, proportions, relations, and how well the information that I'm being given fits the model. How well does it stick with it? And that is inherently limiting on some level. But that idea that within our ordinary rational self, that defines self and world and environment according to like pre-cut, prefabricated models and categories, and then makes comparisons to them, that's the voice of your inner critic. So actually Stephen Kotler, who's talking about the science of flow, says that this is like silencing your own inner Woody Allen. Each of us have like an inner critic, someone who's like constantly shaming themselves. Oh, that's not good enough. Like that idea is stupid. Oh, I better not do that. I feel totally insecure. Because like I like the mental bashing by having a very, very harsh evaluation of every idea, anything I say, how I'm coming across, anything I might want to write, anything I might want to share, right? Where does that inner critic come from? It's all having to do with being not understanding, which keeps wanting to like make everything on the basis of comparison. It's so stuck with being self-conscious. So the only way to get out of that is to experience bitul, which is to like lose yourself in experience. So because now I remove the inner critic, so I'm going to be hyper creative. And in fact, we see between 400% and 800% increase in creativity when someone is in a flow state. So you can't afford to not be in flow. Even Hashem creates the world with flow. It says, Kulam b'chokma sita. Everything is created out of flow, of chokmah. So the whole world is being created in a flow state, so constantly. That's how Hashem likes to do it, and that is amplified creativity. So we also want to amplify our creativity, and we have to get out of our own way, as we serve as this impediment that we have. The next level that we talked about, if you just recall for a moment, we said there are 4 things that we define flow with in our everyday experiences called setter. So the S of setter was for selflessness. We just went through that. And now the T of setter is for timelessness. When someone's in flow, they experience something called time dilation. Your ordinary perception of time changes radically. I myself have been teaching this for a while, and when I get into flow states, I tend to try to do it really late at night when I'm not going to be interrupted, because it's very hard to get into flow. And the smallest interruption, a text message, an email, even someone brushing against your shoulder, can pull you out of this flow state, can break your concentration. So you need like usually a long chunk of time. Like I'm going into the privacy pod where, the light's on, the red light, like film being developed. Someone's in flow state, leave me alone for a couple of hours. And so when I'll do that, I've literally had experiences where 5-6 hours worth of work has literally just vaporized in front of me. And next thing I know, the sun is up and I've forgotten to go to sleep. Like I've seen this many times personally. People I've worked with on flow states have also experienced this. So if you've ever had that where you're really in the groove and you're working and saying, wow, 3 hours went by, where did it go? That's this time dilation. If you're having an amazing conversation with someone, it's like the best conversation ever. You're having like a kind of group flow that's experiencing. So wow, that conversation, it's 3 o'clock in the morning after after the meal, Shabbos, we stayed up for talking for 5 hours. Where'd the time go? I have no idea. So you lose your awareness of time in the state. And it actually can happen in 2 different ways. So for instance, if someone were sitting on a hot stove burner, so time can dilate the other way. Just a few seconds can feel like hours, an eternity, when you're in like a kind of flow state and you're like, being shocked, or like in the moment of a car crash, God forbid. Many people report like time moving really, really slowly. They see the accident coming. It's like time slowed down to like 1/1000th of its normal rate. But more often than not, the time dilation goes in the other direction. It moves really, really fast. In fact, it almost stops because you get into this point where you're like so completely in the moment. You're so present to what you're doing. Like you can't have your mind divided and be in flow. You cannot multitask in flow. You have to be like super, super focused on what there is in front of you. So that timelessness also is characteristic of our spiritual world frame of reference that we mentioned earlier, which is called the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. In general, there are 4 spiritual worlds. And the 3 lower worlds, called the worlds of creation, formation, and action, are all associated with various levels of ordinary temporality. In other words, time is sort of how we are familiar with time happening in those worlds. Even though there may be a certain amount of time compression between the 3 of them, it still represents our ordinary experience of time. But in the 4th world, the highest of the 4 worlds, what we call the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, which is our world associated with flow and unitary consciousness, it says that there is no time there. There's no Zman. There's no time. There's only what's called Seder Zmanim. So you can have what's called an order of times, but you don't actually have time in the radical sense, because sort of like past, present, and future all collapse into one another and become co-present. So that's like the timelessness of flow that happens in this particular experience. And then you have the effortless part. This is the next part of Seter. Seter, so effortlessness is like, I'm so into this, I may be putting out tremendous effort, like climbing El Capitan, a lot of effort, but I don't feel it. It feels so good. I've got this runner's high. I've got this buzz going. I'm in the zone. So it feels amazing, even though I'm working really, really intensively. So we call that the mochin, the consciousness of Shabbat, of the Sabbath. There's weekday consciousness, and work feels like work because I'm self-conscious. I'm not in a flow state during the week. But Shabbos consciousness is flow consciousness. It's totally transforming. And I get like an extra soul on Shabbos, and that perhaps that extra soul is why we can acquire skills at between 200 and 500% the rate that we do during the ordinary time frame that we experience during the week. And our creativity is boosted and our accomplishments are boosted. Everything gets amped in this particular state. So the effortlessness, that's what we mean by Shabbat. I might even be doing a lot of work, but work is not like work because it's all Shabbat state. It's all Sabbath state, like in terms of the consciousness that's going on. And the neuroscience world refers to this as an autotelic experience. Autotelic means like the reward is intrinsic to the thing you're doing. I don't do it to get paid or to become, it's not work that I have some other benefit from. Like, you're not paying me. You're not, I'm not going to become famous from this, or I'm doing it to be popular. It's none of those. Like that the end is in the thing itself. The way we refer to that in Torah literature is schar mitzvah mitzvah, that the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah, that the reward for a good deed is the good deed. It's autotelic. It's pleasurable in and of itself. It doesn't have to appeal to something else. Like flow already feels so amazing. I don't do flow for something outside of flow. I just do it for its own end. So that's one of the amazing experiences. And here we say that attention and awareness just merge in this incredible way when you have this effortless experience that happens. And then the next thing that we see of the term seter, again, S-T-E-R, so now we're at the R, is richness. It says that salience increases when a person's in flow state. So this is like increased pattern recognition. And pattern recognition happens to be when you're like hyper attuned. You have a kind of receptivity. So sometimes this is referred to by flow theorists as you are the receiver. You become a giant antenna to pick up on things going on in your surroundings, like what's going on with the rock face that you're climbing, or how to spin in the air on a skateboard, or how to see ideas on a page of the Talmud that you're learning, that you're connecting together that you ordinarily can't do. So it's interesting, this highest world frame called the world of emanation is also associated with what we call the study of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And Kabbalah originated from the term Hakbalah, to see parallels and correspondences. So it really is the original study of pattern recognition, deep pattern recognition. That's the first and primary meaning of Kabbalah. But Kabbalah comes to mean lekabel, which is receptivity. So you are the receiver. You're just like channeling now experience when you're in this state of bittul, of selflessness and timelessness and effortlessness, the Shabbat state, and the wisdom is happening and you become mutable like water. So now you have this huge data download that occurs, and you just channel. So who personifies this state the most is none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses himself is the very personification of flow. He's, after all, the one who gives us the Torah. And we see that the Shechina Medaber B'tol Grono, the divine presence, literally speaks out of his mouth, out of his throat. He's channeling because he's the receiver. Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, he receives the Torah on Mount Sinai. So how do we further associate him with all of these states? So first of all, it says about Moshe that he was the most selfless person. About Moshe and Aaron, it says, Nachnu ma, what are we? That this expression ma, which this whatness, this questioning of self, applies to the mutable self, the loss of self, the transcendence of self. That's something that Moshe definitely tapped into. So he was in this perpetual state of bitul, of selflessness. That was number one that he experienced. And then we see that he literally is an extract from the water, because Moshe is taken out of the Nile. And he gets his name Moshe from the expression min hamayim mishatiu. He's literally an extraction, a derivative of water. That's where Moshe comes from. He's taken out of the flow state. He's the very personification of flow. And since there's a nitzutz, a spark of Moshe, of Moses in each and every one of us, so that he represents that relative ability that each and every one of us has, because flow is also the most universal thing. Anyone can tap into it. Doesn't matter who you are, young and old, male or female, Jewish, non-Jewish, it doesn't matter. Everyone can tap into flow. It's the most universal thing that we see. So he represents the very personification of flow. And actually in Kabbalah, we say that hyperliterally he derives from the flow state, or from what we call water. That if you look at the letters of the word water in Hebrew, mem, yud, and mem, there's 3 Hebrew letters. Ordinarily, they have a gematria, numerical value, that mem by itself equals 40, yud by itself equals 10, and then the last mem of the word mayim is again another 40. So ordinarily water would just add up. If you took its 3 letters, it would sum to 90. However, there's a concept of taking the generative function of a word, which means all of the letters, which would represent like almost like an encoded process from the first Hebrew letter Aleph until whatever letter that spells the word. So it'd be like all the letters from Aleph until mem of the word mayim, water. So all the letters up to the very first letter of water, mayim, and then all the letters from the letter Aleph until yud, and then again all the letters from Aleph until the final mem once together. So if you take those strings of code and translated those letters into numbers, so all the letters from Aleph until mem is 145. And all the letters from Aleph until Yud is 55. And then again, Aleph till the mem at the end is another 145. Sum it all together, and you get 345, which is the numerical value of Moses, or Moshe in Hebrew, 345. So he's hyper literally generated by a flow state. He represents someone who is able to accomplish that state of flow. Likewise, it says that when you're you become like water, you're in this state of ayin, nothingness. You enter this this fluidity, and you can then experience what's called kvitzat derek, like where you accelerate whatever you need to do. You get to your destination faster. If it normally takes, according to Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours to achieve a certain virtuosity or mastery of some new skill, so in flow, you can do it in a fraction of the time. And actually you can have more and more levels of kvitzat derek, what's called like skipping over the way. It's almost like teleporting, like making the journey at super accelerated speed when you are in flow. And one of the secrets of this is actually, if you take the word ayin, which is for no thingness, the death of the self, the mutable self, the flow state, and you write it's 3 Hebrew letters, Aleph, Yud, and Nun, and you write that in its expanded form. So each letter is like something you can sound out. This is where you're taking the Torah as like a cryptogram. So Aleph, the first letter, becomes Aleph, Aleph, Lamet, Fe. So if you add those 3 letters together, it's 111. And then Yud, Yud, Vav, Dalet is the next letter, expands into 3, that becomes 20. And then finally Nun, Nun, Vav, Nun is 106. So altogether you get 237. So expanding the word for ayin, nothingness in Hebrew, gives you a numerical value of 237, which the Kabbalists say equals the phrase avo hayom el ayin, I've come this day to the fountain. It's talking about Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, who goes out on what should have been a 17-day journey, but he compresses it into a single day. So it's super accelerated. That's like sometimes part of the flow experience, to be able to take 17 days of learning or 17 days worth of work in your office and do it all in one day. You have to be able to reach this flow state to accomplish that. But you can truly keep accelerating these things more and more and more. When a person's in a state of flow, it's sometimes referred to as deep work or deep practice. And there's a difference between being half asleep and disengaged when you're doing an activity and when you're intensively engaged in it, very alive, feel like you're on fire. And that difference is seen in terms of the brain. So neurons that fire together wire together. If you learn something new in your brain, you actually make new neural connections, and you can see them grow over time. You can look at them in brain scans. You can see before or after photos. But what's really interesting is if you do deep work and deep practice, like in a flow state, you actually get an additional enhancement, which has to do with the wrapping of these little tentacles, these neuron connections in the brain. Think of them as like an extension cord that you might have sitting around your house. And the copper wire is the neuron. And let's say the orange insulation that goes around it that keeps the signal or the current from leaking out, that's like what's called a myelin sheath. In neuroscience, neurons get wrapped when you do deep practice in a myelin sheath, and it can accelerate your brain signals by up to 3,000 times. So not only can you have 500%, 5 times the productivity in a flow state, but you can develop myelin wrapping of your neuron connections, which means that you may be able to further accelerate the brain signal reactions with those skills you're building by 3,000 times. Einstein's brain was studied. They expected his brain to be larger than normal. They found no abnormality there, as he had an average sized brain. But what they did find was a lot of myelin wrapping around those segments of the brain associated with mathematics and physics. Right? Those were very well wrapped. So similarly, if you were to probably look at Michael Jordan's brain and see his motor skills and spatiality from playing basketball, the way he outperforms everyone else is in this same regard too. So there's this sense of the myelin sheath, which can even further accelerate the acceleration and how fast things can be achievable and accomplishable. So those are all tremendous possibilities. The key to triggering flow, there are many of them, but one of the most important ones, and the only one I'll mention right now, has to do with finding something that's the right balance between challenge and skills, right? Like sometimes we go out and we want to take on something that's way too hard for us and become overwhelmed by it. So the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi says that that's related to anxiety, right? We overshot, right? Like the skills to challenge ratio is too hard. On the other hand, very often we're in unstimulated environments, especially classrooms and workplaces and all kinds of daily experiences, and that leads to boredom. This is too easy to me. I know I have 100% success rate. I have like almost 100% chance of achieving what I'm going to do. So it doesn't really challenging me. It leads to boredom. So what we really need to find is what's called the Goldilocks zone, the sweet spot in between boredom and anxiety with challenge. And this is what we call risk taking. So you don't need to take a risk like climbing El Capitan or skateboarding some huge ramp. You are able to sometimes take a risk just by doing public speaking. In fact, maybe some people would say they're more scared of public speaking than they would be of free climbing El Capitan. I'm not sure. It's debatable. You'll let me know. But in general, there are many instances where we can take a risk. Sharing an idea in a boardroom or amongst colleagues, having a conversation, asking someone out on a shidduch. There are many things we can do that represent a sense of deep consequences and risk. And certainly like the risk is very clear and apparent in the action adventure sports. So we have a different term for this in Chassidut and in Torah literature. We call it the koach hamesirut nefesh, the power of literally self-sacrifice, but it should be translated as like taking risks. And that will stimulate flow. So I got to take a risk, and the risk has got to be something that pushes me out of my comfort zone, beyond my natural limits, but not too far that it breaks me. I want to stretch, but not break. And so the image that we have for this comes from actually the whole Passover narrative from Pesach. And we see with the Seder table that we have the Seder plate that we put out. The first thing on there is a zroa, meaning that this is actually the first thing that triggers going out of our own personal Egypt. Of course, Egypt means Meitzer v'Hagbala, to be confined and limited. So whatever my personal limits are, or human limits are, can't do a 1080 on a skateboard, or free climb, or read 3 books in one day, or whatever I think my limits are, they're called my own personal daily Egypt. And to go to Egypt, we start with the siman, the sign of the zroa. And zroa seems to be a shank bone, but the etymology of the term actually relates to a phrase of how God takes us out of Egypt, how God takes us beyond our limitations, which is with a zroya netuya, an outstretched arm. So that's exactly the place between boredom and anxiety. I should stretch. I should be able to stretch myself out of my comfort zone, which is Egypt here, my being in the box. But not so, I don't want to break my arm, but I also don't want to keep it in a relaxed position. I need to stretch. So this is what's called the Yerkes-Dodson principle, which says that it should average around 4%. Not exactly that, but like on average, like you should find a challenge that's about 4% greater than what you've previously done before. And if you want to do 50% more, if you want to double your best, so chunk it down into a whole series of like small gains, incremental gains that are around 4% stretches beyond your previous personal best record. And the word zroya netuya, this outstretched arm that's here like as a sign in the Passover Seder, it also comes from the etymology zera, which is like a seed. It's like the germination or the ignition, the fertilization, the triggering of the flow process. I need to find something that's risk-taking. Of course, there's a big risk going out of Egypt. And I have to stretch myself in my capabilities a little bit, but not to the point of breaking. And that keeps me super engaged so that I'm neither bored nor overcome by anxiety in order to achieve a state of flow. And of course, there are many other things that come with this also. A lot very much helps to have a rich environment. Often we put people in very poor environments. Schools or office buildings can be architecturally very poor. The interior design can actually like flatline the brain. Going out into nature sometimes can provide that stimulus. Traveling can provide that stimulus. Exposing yourself to new forms of study, new concepts, new books, new experiences, that creates rich environment. And Hashem believes very deeply that we should always have the availability of a rich environment, because it says he creates the world, yesh ma'ayin b'kol rega tamid, something from nothing at each and every moment. So there's always novelty. If you know how to look at the world in the right way, you'll see the world is always novel. It's constant surprise happening. And you therefore always have opportunities to like stretch yourself out of what's familiar and go into flow. So we really ultimately want to reach a state of total flow. And that leaves me with my concluding remark here, that in the Talmud, there's a very disturbing statement in Tractate Sanhedrin where it says, Ein Mashiach Yisrael, literally that there's no Messiah for the Jewish people. What sounds heretical, right? How could you say such a thing? One of the tenets of Jewish belief is that there's a Mashiach, a Messiah. But the way in which it's interpreted, it says first on the surface of it that we already had the Mashiach in the times of Heskiyahu Melech Yehuda. That's one opinion, that like in some previous point in history with the king Heskiyahu, Mashiach already came. But ultimately, the deeper meaning of this phrase is that the Talmud is unvocalized. So when it says Ein Mashiach Yisrael, the Baal Shem Tov says anytime you say the word Ein, which really is negation, there is no, not Messiah to Israel. He says you can read it Ayin. So Ayin is the Mashiach of Yisrael. To be in a flow state, Mashiach teaches us all how to flow all the time. So it's Olam Shekul Shabbat. The whole world becomes effortless because we're always in flow. And there's the oneg Shabbat, the tremendous pleasure. Like we said, the 5 neurochemicals that you get when you're in flow, tremendous state of pleasure that you experience when you're in this state. And that's what happens to us all the time. So what's amazing is the Kabbalists say that Ein Mashiach Yisrael, there's no Messiah to the Jewish people, or rather, Ayin, the nothingness, is the Mashiach of Israel. It equals exactly 990, that phrase, which is Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. The two like functional identities in terms of performative roles that we see with the composite identity of the Messiah of Mashiach is like the Messiah or Mashiach, son of Joseph, Yosef, and Mashiach, Messiah, son of David, King David. Those two titles, which are like two identities, sum equal exactly Ein Mashiach Yisrael. So both of them manifest this state of like flow consciousness. And then we can say, Ma'ayin Yavo Ezri, from where will come my help? When if I lift my awareness, we ask, where does my help come, my support, Hashem? It's Ma'ayin, from the state of Ayin, from the flow state of nothing, is actually where Hashem is able to give us this super boost and capability, which really makes us limitless. That allows us to transcend all of our limits, and first and foremost with the limits of self, in order to achieve all of these amazing things. So it's my deepest wish that all of you will learn more about flow and see it as a very useful translation of so many of the core concepts that we learn about in Torah and Kabbalah and in Hasidic philosophy. It's literally replete with references to flow states and psychology. And once you make the connections, that's where you get the richness of seeing, like receiving the pattern recognition. And that sometimes that pattern recognition, like in the world of emanation, is called Olam HaZivugim, like, and Yehudim, world of unifications. It's like mating or connecting or marrying different concepts together. So we want to flow by connecting all the concepts of flow to all these concepts within Chassidut. And then through that, we have salience, we have enriched creativity and enriched pattern recognition and relatability, and it shows us that we live ultimately in one world. We're at one with this world. These aren't like two separate descriptions. It's really deeply talking about one and the same thing. So I know I've gone a little bit over, and I want to leave some time for questions. So for anyone who can afford to stay a little bit longer, I certainly am happy to hang along and answer some different questions. But I hope you've been flowing, and this felt like time dilation down to a few minutes and not to up to a few hours. And your perception of it. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, I want to thank you. This was extra special. Truly, truly extra special. I really enjoyed it. If anybody has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. And then remute yourself after you ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sharon. Hi, Rabbi Crispe.
Hi, how are you?
Great. It's great to see you. So here's my question. I get what you're saying. I'm a runner. I run 5Ks. I know the zone. I meditate. I know the zone. I've gone to the library, shut off my phone. Hours went by and I was in the zone. The big question of the night. With Shabbat, it's a lot harder for me. How do I shut off my cell phone, shut off my computer, my TV, and be in the zone? But that feeling, like when you're running, you get exhilarated. It's hard for me. How can you help all of us on here, the ones that don't celebrate Shabbat, do it? Step by step now.
So there's at least 10 flow triggers that you can talk about, and they're all beautifully associated with Shabbat. It's possible to be in Shabbat and not be in Shabbat. You can be having a Sabbath experience without really getting the like what we're talking about in terms of the flow state of Shabbat. And the first thing is like, what is the challenge risk part? Usually Shabbat seems to be literally low risk. You don't associate it with exploring a foreign country or mountain climbing or skydiving out of an airplane, right? It doesn't necessarily do that. Actually, one of the first and foremost places where you can experience that risk that will help stimulate flow in Shabbat is by Haknasas Orchim, having guests. When you have new people to your table And there's always the surprise. You never know how it's going to go, right? You're inviting total strangers over to your house, right? You're going to have this every time you go into that conversation. It's going to be a little bit of a surprise party where it goes. You don't know. And so that's going to actually, you'll probably notice that you prepare a lot harder for it. You probably push yourself a little bit harder to be social in that state. And my guess is when you have like a really stimulating Shabbos table, because there's interesting people around the table, that's one very basic way in which it's, you wouldn't think of that as a kind of risk taking, but it is. It's a kind of social risk taking. I'm opening myself up. This is my home. Emotionally, I'm opening my heart up. I'm opening my life up. I'm sharing with these people, right? Having this kind of connection. That's really hard. A lot of people would far rather skydive than open themselves up emotionally and mentally to new people on Shabbat. The second thing that you can do is this has to do with lateral thinking, lateral experiences, is like, exposing yourself to something new. Learn something totally new in the Torah that's a little bit outside your comfort zone. It's new, you haven't experienced it. So if you're going to learn Torah on Shabbos, it's a good idea. Everything has panim chadashot, a new face to it. So you need to, if you're looking at the same thing again, you have to try to see some new dimension in it. If you're going to learn something totally new, find something that's going to be stimulating because it's not overly familiar, because that could be boredom on the one hand. And on the other hand, you don't want to pick something like is way too difficult, that like, wow, I don't read Aramaic and I'm trying to like now learn a complicated text in Aramaic. Probably will overwhelm you with anxiety and you'll give up if you're either bored or you're anxious. You need to find the novelty and create a rich learning environment in order to get yourself into that place on Shabbat. And you have to have a clear goal ahead of time. So if my clear goal, this is also very important. What is my objective? What's my clear goal here? My clear goal is I want to have a deeper connection with people that I already know, or a new connection with new people, or I'm going to learn something in a new way, or I'm going to learn something totally new. And I want to create like the enriched environment of it. All of those things are helping to create a Shabbat experience. So it could be you're putting tremendous effort in, but if you hit the flow state, you're enjoying it so much, you won't even notice it.
Anybody else has a question? Unmute yourself if you have a question. If you don't,
I have a question. There's a line in the Torah when Rivka sends Yaakov to stay with Lavan for a few days, but it's not a few days. Is that related to this flow state also?
Well, you can
You're muted.
I gotta unmute you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm unmuted now. Okay. Am I good?
You're good.
So imagine now you're working for something that you have a clear goal for it. So Yaakov had to work for a whole lot of years there to be able to marry Rachel, and really Leah and Rachel, right? So the ability to pass that time, if there's a goal that is at the end of it, you're working towards something, is more likely to put a person in a flow state than not. So there is, in a certain sense, at least on a psycho spiritual level, a little bit of time dilation that's happening there. But the perhaps clearer example, the better example, is really with Eliezer going to get a shidduch for Isaac, for Yitzhak, when he goes. That's a better, it's probably a cleaner example of what this is like. Another question?
I wanted to ask you, you recommended that we learn about flow. Do you recommend a place to learn this?
So any of the, yes. I mean, if you want to learn about it in terms of Torah and flow more, I'm actually starting to do a whole series of videos on it. I put 2 out thus far. I'm probably going to have a whole bunch more, Mirza Shem, over the summer. And perhaps those will be written up as articles. But if you do like basic searches for it, so you'll find quite a lot of information. The books of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi come highly recommended. and he's written on flow. And like flow in business and creativity and all kinds of other examples of it. And again, it can be in a solitary pursuit, like a sport or learning or something like meditation, but it also is a group experience. So you like having tremendous shalom bayit, like domestic tranquility with one's spouse. Shalom bayit is actually a notrikun or notarikun for Shabbat. A Sabbath experience is like where we're just so connected. We totally feel like we're one person. We're like blending of egos that's occurring between oneself and one's spouse. That's also like a flow state. So all of this is spoken about in the literature. And I can recommend the works of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi if you're interested in works on flow as it pertains more to like peak performance in athletics and business. So the work of Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel is very good on that. Interestingly, in one of their books called Stealing Fire, on page 109, if you want to look it up, they reference the medieval Kabbalist Rabbi Avram Abulafia and how his meditative states have been studied by neuroscientists. In fact, there's a whole book written about Abulafia's Kabbalistic meditations and neuroscience. It's really quite remarkable, and how they resemble what we know now about transient hypofrontality and flow states. So that's called Stealing Fire, that particular book. Also, there have been a lot of studies with microdosing of psychedelics and things like that, which also resemble flow. Just it's usually an uncontrolled flow experience. So they've used microdosing of psychedelics to treat PTSD in soldiers, but they also found they could get them into the same state of flow just by teaching them how to surf. And that surfing also treated PTSD because of the flow experience. So it has a kind of therapeutic value to it as well.
I have a question. It's a little weird, but how is it different than someone who is manic? And I don't mean go shopping and all that, but gets into a task and then can't stop, like organizing the house, or an OCD type of.
Excellent question. Amazing question. And usually when I have longer, like normally I would do like a few hours on like a flow talk. This is only just a very, very brief introduction to it. And in Torah, we talk about this as a ratzo, like to run, which is letzet min hakelim, to go out of your vessels, go out of your body, to have that ecstasis, right? The out of body, you're out of your mind kind of experience. And that can become manic. There actually is a danger there. Absolutely. So the Torah ultimately wants us to experience not just a run, like up into like a flow state, but also a shuv, a return, to go back into your body, go back into your vessels, go back into ordinary consciousness, which can feel, because you're feeling so high and have such a heightened experience in flow with this chemical cocktail of norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, and anandamide and serotonin. Because that can make a person feel so amped and so expansive, it actually can lead to the depression piece coming back out of it. And actually that's dealt with in the work of Stephen Kotler a little bit. And we call that ratzo v'shuv, to run and return. Torah wants us to have both. So Shabbat is experienced, currently we can only experience flow or a Sabbath state intermittently. Most of the time, it's like the mundane state of consciousness. We'll call that weekday consciousness, which is punctuated by intervals of having these peak experiences called Shabbat states. When Mashiach comes, we can have flow all the time. But right now, we can't really control that. We have to be able to come back in the week and see what we learned with flow, which means come back into ourselves, into our bodies. We can't stay there all the time. And actually, people are cautioned that in a flow state, everything sounds so good. It's best not to make enormous life-altering decisions when you're in a flow state, because you'll just like your inner critic is silenced, so you'll just go for it, whatever it is. I'm going to sell my business and move to Alaska. I'm going to, bungee jump off the Empire State Building. Like there, everything is just like yes and yes and yes when you're in a flow state. So people are cautioned not to make decisions. Also, and I learned this the hard way, when I would suddenly come out of flow and realize it was like 6:30 in the morning and the sun was up, and I started at like 11:30 at night, and like literally it was like 6.5 hours later and I forgot to sleep. You need to like sometimes set an alarm, quite literally, if there's no one there to take you out of it, because I often would go so long that it wasn't till like I started starving and crashing from extreme physical exhaustion that I even realized that such periods of time went by. Quite literally, I'm a little scared to go into that state of it without like something to cue me to come out of it. So like set an alarm, tell yourself, I'm going to allow myself to be in flow for 2 hours. Then I'm coming back to planet Earth, in my daily life. So having a really clear goal, what you're going to do during that time, and then setting some boundaries for it are really, really critical, and realizing that you can't be there all the time. And it can feel a little bit like of a downer when you're not having this peak experience. And it's supposed to be like that with Havdalah anyway. You have to have like a trace of Shabbos that comes out through the week, because otherwise, if you didn't have that lingering memory of the flow Sabbath state, like the weekday, going back in the weekday would be such a downer as opposed to the peak experience of the Sabbath, the Shabbat.
Let me ask you a question, Rabbi. I would love to make a class. I don't know if you have, or make a series on the Seder Shtalshlus. Because you mentioned Atzilus, and I'm learning in Tanya. I'm learning about Atzilus and Bri Yitzir Asiyah, and the mems in Tanya. And I'm looking for somebody. Do you have a setup? I would love to maybe set up a class. I don't know how many sessions it would take to give bring it out very clearly what is say the Shtalshlus and the four worlds. Do you have to think? Can you do that for us? Can I set up such a thing?
I mean, I've got tons of material. I have taught that in the past. There's different ways of doing it. Sometimes, by the way, there are 22 levels to Seder Histalshalit, which, by the way, in the world is called Great Chain of Being. So the 22 levels correspond to the alphabet. But yeah, it depends how much detail you want to go. I mean, that can be done in a very modular way. So you can like have takeaways from each part of it, or you can do
the Tanya way, without the four worlds and the spheres within the four worlds.
Right. All the experiences that are associated. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I can do that like in 5 classes or 50 classes. You tell me what I can.
Okay, so I'll talk to you after this. I would like to set that
have
up.
your people call my people.
I'll have my people call your people, and we'll take this out. You know what? Listen. I love you, and I love the way you. I mean, a lot of the English words I don't know. You know that, and the way you bring out Chassidus is in a very powerful way. In a very clear way. It's really a delight to listen to you. It is. I can listen to you hours. And when you throw in a couple of Gematiyos, it's to me special. So I really appreciate Asher. I really appreciate coming tonight. I believe people. Oops, that was heavy. I think that people enjoyed it, and they had a great learning experience. Where are you? You're still there?
I'm still here.
So I want to thank you again. I appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for coming and learning tonight. I hope you come to all the events we have. I hope you'll be able to sponsor. We're looking to bring more Zoom events on online. We're looking for sponsors of events, and the more we can have sponsors, the more events we can do. And we just had an hour of great learning. Really. An hour of deep learning, and there can't be anything better than to sit and to listen and learn Torah for an hour straight, and to be packaged in such an unbelievable way. So I thank you again, Usher. I'm going to get in touch with you. I really would like to set up this class. I don't think 50 classes will go, because it's just too. I don't think people would go for 50 kind of classes. So I would like to do it into like a 3-class, some kind of a 3-class or 3 to 5, whatever I want, and we'll be able to package it and really come out and give an hour, 3-4 hours, and give people an understanding of Seder Shtalshlus. So I'm going to talk to you, and hopefully we'll set it up, and we'll do it again. I really appreciate Usher. I'm sure you don't go into your trance for next till Shachris, and have a great night, Usher. It's great to speak to you. Great to listen to you as always, and they should give you koyach and strength to continue to spread Torah, Chassidus, Kabbalah to the masses, and you do it really well. So God bless you and thank you.
Amen. Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I hope that everyone remains safe and healthy down there.
Yes.
And in the merit of learning Torah, it should just spread infectious health everywhere.
Amen.
And good things should be the only thing infecting the world right now.
Amen.
Infect everyone with positivity.